Welcome to the Warships Podcast with your host, Kellorn, Venacera, and Arun.
Hello and welcome to episode 139 of the Warships Podcast. I'm your host, Kellorn, and Venacera and Arun are here with me today, and we have no Zoup for you sitting in as well. Welcome once again, Zoup. Are you just like a guest host of the podcast at this point already?
Yeah, I think so. I'm like Chevy Chase on Saturday Night Live, you know. He's been on so much, everyone thinks he's part of the cast, but he's really not.
Hopefully you don't look quite as weathered as Chevy Chase does these days.
Yeah, he didn't age good, did he? Well,
not so much. Though did you like my little Jason Statham Twitter post last weekend?
Yeah, that I can live with.
For those that don't know, I was having a bit of a funny day and was like, why does Zoup kind of look related to Jason Statham? And he was highly entertained by that.
Best compliment I've received all year.
Well, first up, we have this week's big announcement of the upcoming Italian cruiser line. We have very little to go off so far, save for a few screenshots. But one thing that I did note is that the Tier 6 cruiser Trento has 203mm guns, designated it as a heavy cruiser at Tier 6. More than that, she has 8 203mm guns at Tier 6, and depending on how the rest of the gun stats set up, this ship could feasibly compete with the Tier 6 Pensacola from the USN line, especially since she also has torpedoes. So I'm pretty excited about the idea that we're going to get kind of another heavy cruiser line in the game.
Yeah, that and the other weapon type coming with, or shell type, I should say.
So is that confirmed that those semi-piercing AP or something like that?
Yeah, I was trying to finish up the stream, listening to the EU stream. I did not get the chance to listen to the Russian stream, but yes, they did talk about fuel smoke and also the SAP shells for these ships. So they're not going to have HE, but they will have, and of course, work in progress. So these things could change. They haven't gotten to balancing or even super testing yet with them. But yes, SAP will be the alternative to AP. So we'll have two different shell types, but no HE.
So is that just going to be a fuse timer type of change, Vanessa, or is it there? Did they specify that there was something special coming with the SAP?
To my understanding is, I think it's kind of like the Royal Navy's light cruisers, with how they ricochet. I'm not 100% sure because, again, I'm trying to listen to this stream and not, there's a lot of information and not entirely clear. But I suppose we could just ping the devs in chat and try and get a little clarification on it.
So kind of an off-the-wall idea here, getting off topic a little bit here of the Italian cruisers. But Zoup, how would you feel about them removing HE from the British battleships and giving them semi-AP, which is kind of what they have right now, and then real AP to the British battleships?
I would absolutely love that. I think, even the Conqueror has really good AP, but no one uses it. And they set this weird precedent by somehow making the battleship line, the Royal Navy battleship line, an HE line, which just goes against all logic for a battleship. And the gimmick really isn't based on anything historically either, because battleships shooting at other ships used AP unless, all they had was HE loaded. And I know that happened a couple times in the Pacific, primarily with, I think it was Congo or one of the battleships. They were loaded for shore bombardment when the U.S. Navy showed up. So they just went with what they had. But that's the only time that you would use HE, against shore bombardments or basically a mistake or panic fire. So I'm not a fan of HE, and I don't like where the British battleships went with it. So I think removing that would be awesome and putting the new type of AP in. But the problem with that is, how is that going to anger the player base? I mean, I'm sure plenty would be happy, but you do have a lot of players out there that love the British line because of the HE, and they play it because of the HE, and they don't mind the HE. So I think if they were to do that, I think it's a little too late in the game for that.
Yeah, but let's be realistic, though. I mean, the gameplay that has come of that because of the HE spamming, you now see people with other nations of battleships also starting to spam HE, and it's really like, I don't think it's a good thing for the game.
No, not at all. And to that point, I mean, even last night when I was streaming with Sea Raptor and Vulgar, there were plenty of battleships firing HE. And, part of you wonders, well, is this just because they don't know any better? But these are high tier games. These are high tier games, and you still got tier 9s and 10s. I think the Yamato was firing HE at me. And I don't know if he just had that loaded because of destroyers being around, but it kind of makes you think. And I agree with you. I mean, it really started a bad precedent. And it just, well, we said it a year or two ago. I mean, how long have the British battleships been out for? I mean, in the very beginning, we said it was unhealthy, and it's still unhealthy. And yet here we are. But fortunately, I don't see as many conquerors as I used to anymore. I think everybody's infatuated with the Kremlin right now and its brawling prowess. So that's a positive, at least. I guess we got rid of one ship with a huge gimmick for another ship with a huge gimmick.
So getting back to the Italian cruisers a little bit, Vanessa, Zoup, Arun, how do you guys feel that you expect these Italian cruisers to play? Is the semi-AP going to be the only gimmick they get? Is there something that you expect them to be good or bad at?
Well, I think they're going to be fast. I think they're going to be agile. I think they're going to be nimble. And I think they're going to be very easily destructible. And that would fit what we've already seen with Duca de Osta. They're very fast ships. They're sleek.
Don't forget Abruzzi.
And Abruzzi. They're very enjoyable to captain. I mean, they handle very, very well. Great torpedo angles on them as well. Decent torpedoes, if I recall, the damage isn't the greatest, but you've got great angles on them. So
sea mines.
Yeah, there you go. But they have range. So I think these ships are pretty much just going to be like fast attack ships that you're going to want to pair up with your faster ships like French ships, and they're going to be good for flanking. But they're also going to be one of those ships that, the skill gap might be a little high. And if you mess up in these ships, go broadside at the wrong time, you're probably going to see a lot of deletions in these ships as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's going to be like Abruzzi. You're going to be zipping around. You're going to be having a lot of fun, like a very, very large destroyer. And the handling of the ship and the playing the ship is going to be fun, but the skill ceiling will be very, very high. I would say it would be like destroyers almost. There were some destroyer lines where, you really have to like think about what you're doing, but the enjoyment that you'll get out of it once you understand the ship and understand how you should play the ships, I think will really impress a lot of people. It's interesting to see, with the two different shell types, they're probably going to have pretty decent muzzle velocity and, shell flight time if we see it like, the other ships. So, you kind of got that, cool. Okay. You should air quotes, be able to hit stuff and, kind of zip in, zip out. I think one of the things that Vessery said on the stream was it was going to be high alpha, lower rate of fire, so that you really want to time your shots and aim good. So that's kind of a play style that more suits me, where I wait for the shot instead of necessarily spamming. And, you zip in, you've got that fuel smoke. I really want to see more about that, because they were saying you could go at full speed and smoke, and it last, probably 30, 40 seconds and allow you to kind of creep in, but at full speed. It's really interesting. I want them, and maybe they came out on one of the other dev blogs and explained it a little more, but that and the SAP, how much is that going to differ from regular AP, and if it will be one where you're using the SAP against a lighter armor target, maybe destroyers or light cruisers, and then switching over to the AP. And if your AP has a high alpha, then these are going to be interesting, very interesting ships. They said the torpedoes should be kind of spammy, or sea mines should be kind of spammy too. I'm really looking forward to testing these ships.
Everyone, how about you? And what are your thoughts on the idea of Italian cruisers?
Another line of squishy cruisers that are weak at HE spamming. Very not enthused. I mean, it's kind of like playing the Königsberg and Nürnberg, and the German ones. It's some people might call it requires lots of skill, but to me it's more like, well, do you get lucky that the enemies don't shoot you, or do you not get lucky? And I don't know. It doesn't sound very exciting to me. I suppose we'll see how the smoke works. Maybe it'll just be frustrating to play against instead. So, I can't really tell by the information we have right now. So I'm just waiting to see what else we learn.
Yeah, like I said, this is very early on in how these Italian cruisers are being announced, and we really have very little to go off of other than the dev blog and the stream that Vanessa was talking about. So it'll be interesting to see where these end up, but they definitely sound to be more on the unique side than we're used to. Next up for news, we have an announcement for distribution methods for some upcoming premium ships. Smolensk will be sold for coal, Summers will be sold for steel, Friesland will be for free XP. And we're going to be going into a little bit more in depth on Friesland in a minute. But what about you guys? What do you guys think about these distribution methods? Are you okay with them? I can kind of already hear Vanessa screaming in the background that Summers is going to be sold for steel.
Boo.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm very upset that it's going to be sold for steel, and I guess I'm going to have to save up all my steel to use towards that, and I might be able to purchase it at some point next year after the holiday event if they do that again. But I'm happy that they're actually putting tier 10 ships in there as as something you can buy other than steel. I mean, it's nice that Smolensk will be easier to get for everyone. Well, I don't know if it'll be nice. Because that might be a bad idea. Actually, I think Smolensk might be the one you want to hide behind steel, just because in the hands of the right player, it's going to be very annoying to play against, and in the hands of the wrong player, it's just going to be a lot of HE spam that's annoying to play against.
But it'll die fast. I mean, that is the one thing about Smolensk that I found is that I died a lot.
Quite have that big of an issue with it, but I guess maybe I every ship has suits different people's play styles, and I think when I played it I was on a Worcester kick also, so it's very much used to hiding behind terrain and just being sneaky and firing, but yeah, I don't know. It's one of those ships. I don't think the ship's healthy at all for the game, and we were just talking about HE issues with British battleship. So now you're adding basically a Kutuzov at tier 10. And I played Kutuzov last night and remembered, it just kind of reminded me how powerful that still is. And you don't see him much anymore. And I think for me, it's the first time I've played it in ages just because. But it still starts fires like crazy. And it's still annoying to play against because of the range. And now you got something like that at tier 10. But yeah, good on them for making a bunch of free XP and coal ships. That's awesome. But I wish that Summers was not steel.
I also don't like the steel part, but I can live with it because it's just one ship and the other two are accessible. So I'll take what I can get. I'm kind of disappointed that the steel ship is not Friesland, though, because that's the ship I'm least interested in. But whatever.
I don't think the Friesland was ever going to be a steel ship. It doesn't feel like a steel ship. And I mean, on some level, Summers is really, really good. Zoup, even with the nerf that they're giving it to the main guns from 5 seconds to 6 second reload, Summers is really, really, really good. And so limiting the number of them, I don't know that I can be too upset about that.
Arun brought up Friesland. I am completely excited about Friesland. I adore that ship, and I would almost say that it's a better ship than Summers, just if you use it the right way. Of course, it's dependent on whether or not there's aircraft carriers in the round, but even when there aren't, I mean, highest damage per minute out of all tier 9 destroyers when you're dealing with the guns. And I know it's not for everyone, but man, I'm loving that destroyer. I'm absolutely
We're going to be talking
it.
about it in a little bit more in depth in just a minute.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to talk about these distribution methods a little bit before we got into depth on Friesland. But it sounds like, well, that's where you guys want to go right now anyway. So as promised, the destroyer Friesland is next up on our to-do list. At tier 9 with 4 120 millimeter guns, no torpedoes, defensive AA, long-lasting smoke, and hydro. Friesland is kind of a unique addition to the destroyer class, but the question in my mind is she any good? Because I kind of disagree with Zoup. I did not enjoy playing her at all. I should note that there are some upcoming changes to the ship on the dev blog, namely the turrets are going to be able to rotate 360 degrees, her turret angles are getting buffed a little bit, and her defensive AA fire bonus is going from 200% to 100%. So she's not going to be quite as effective at shooting down planes. Now, Zoup, I watched your video about Friesland, and I could tell that you really, really liked the ship. And I kind of was keeping that in mind as I was actually watching it as I was playing Friesland. And because I didn't take AFT, I took concealment and IFHE and BFT and survivability expert. And I was not shooting down the planes as readily as you seem to be talking about.
Yeah, so I built my ship completely towards anti-aircraft. Every single thing I could add to it to shoot down planes, I added. And I found myself able to shoot down tier 10 planes in swaths of them, even without using defensive fire. And when you click that defensive fire on, it just absolutely melts them. I mean, you saw in the video that those poor Midway dive bombers that tried to drop on me, and they all just split out of the sky like an octopus. I mean, you'd see smoke trails everywhere, and it was too strong. It really was too strong, and that's why they've decreased the effectiveness from 200% to 100%. And I can understand that. But the Friesland is a very acquired taste. It is not your traditional destroyer, though it can very much do traditional destroyer things. I mean, if you get in a gun battle with another tier 9 destroyer, you're absolutely going to wreck it. I mean, it's a match pound for pound against the Kitakaze. I mean, the only destroyer I probably would not want to go toe-to-toe with is the Haragumo, and that's just because it's Haragumo. But anything else, I don't think I'd be afraid of them in a gunfight, just because the reload is so fast. The guns do hit hard. So, but you got to get in that mindset, though, that you don't have torps. And because of that, you're losing a very big defensive feature. On the flip side, you do have smoke that lasts, 2 minutes. And you can sit in that smoke, provided that there's other spotting out there. And battleships that are within, 14 clicks, they cannot escape your stream of HE shells, and you're going to set them on fire, and it's going to drive them crazy. But again, how good the ship does is dependent on what's in the round. And if you get in a round without carriers, which are kind of losing popularity right now, it's not going to be as fun to play. And you're relegated to either providing smoke for your team or shooting at other ships from afar. I mean, you can contest caps, but it depends on how much radar there is. So it's an acquired taste, and I can see why some people don't like it. For me, I like how it's the answer to destroyer players who are aggravated with carriers right now, and maybe that's why Wargaming went with it, saying, here, you know what, we're tired of you all complaining, take this ship. So
I don't like the Friesland. I don't like the concept really, because she's another destroyer that doesn't fulfill quite a destroyer role, and so matchmaking can completely screw over your team when you have a Friesland or when you're the Friesland. Because, like Zoup said, if there's no CV, a large chunk of your effectiveness just evaporates. But fine, that's not too bad. But then you actually have concealment that's worse than Harugumo, for example. And even though Zoup said that he wouldn't like to fight the Harugumo, well, you probably also don't want to fight the Khabarovsk. You also probably don't want to fight the upcoming French top-tier destroyers, because, well, when they press the button where they boost their reload, they deal quite a bit more DPM. And Khabarovsk, obviously, it's because she has a heal plus the very good armor plates she has. And as a result of that, especially the fact that she doesn't fulfill quite the same role, I didn't have nearly as much fun, because if I had been any other destroyer in quite many of those games, I could always just split up and try to torpedo from the side, or at least go and straight up contest other destroyers head to head, just run it head on into them. But I'm in a position that's actually worse than Harugumo for that, because my concealment is 6.4 kilometers. So I would like to see some kind of a concealment buff on her. Maybe even just 6.1 or 6.2. Even that could be pretty good, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting boat. I would kind of agree with Zoup, but I definitely agree with you, Arun. The thing with the ship is it's highly, highly team dependent and matchmaking. Like you're kind of at the will of the matchmaker, both for what you have on your team and what the enemy has. And I've tried to put as many games as I could in this. There's been times where I've done absolutely fantastic, and there's been times where I've pretty much lost like 12 games in a row. And it's not that I had bad games. I had really good games. But were you able to influence the battle enough and actually win? I would say no. It's not like other destroyers where if you have a high skill ceiling and play the destroyer really, really well and kind of help your team out and fulfill destroyer role things, you can really influence a win. With this ship, it's very hard to do. It might as well be a light cruiser with a halfway decent sonar and an amazing smoke where you just sit there and spam set fires and just do crazy damage with your guns. And you can often, kind of force destroyers. There was often times that I would go in and force destroyers to engage and then smoke and then sonar, and then they're done. They're trapped. They can't get away in time. And your rate of fire is so crazy that you just knock them out. But when you take care of all the enemy destroyers and you have the other ships left, you just have to sit there and then become a light cruiser. And it's not like you can necessarily do that well enough, because your team is also expecting you to kind of sit there and spot, especially if all of your destroyers were taken out. And the static kind of slow gameplay, at least on the NA server, can sometimes devolve where you really have to make a choice between spotting, supporting your team, or trying to farm damage. And that doesn't always kind of flow out the way that you want to do in a match. And you could sit there, you could have amazing matches, and then there's other matches where there's just really not much you can do. And though you might have fun, you just lose repeatedly because you weren't able to influence it enough to win the game.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And I played Friesland a lot solo, and I also played it last night in a division. I think what you're going to find with a ship like the Friesland is it's going to be more suited to players that like to div up, and someone that's willing to go into a round as an aircraft carrier because they're good at aircraft carriers. And, you just set that division in such a way that you play off each other's strengths. You've got a Friesland, you've got possibly a cruiser like Des Moines or something else that has very good AA, and you go into it knowing that you're just setting yourself up to wreck the enemy aircraft carrier and basically force the battle to go your way. So I definitely think as a solo player, the utility for Friesland is not going to be that if you were in a division and going into a match deliberately setting it up in a way that you're going to be able to influence it. So I can agree with that. But I mean, just as a ship, yeah, you might not win the way you want to, but I still, for me, it's a fun ship. And, I just like shooting tons of planes down, and kind of makes me giggle seeing a destroyer shoot aircraft down better than most cruisers can do it. So there's something unique about that. But again, like Arun said, it's not a traditional destroyer, and it's not doing a traditional destroyer role. And I think we're running into this thing now where we've got a lot of ships, whether it be cruisers or, destroyers. There's a lot of ships out there that we're getting now that aren't traditional in what they do. And again, I don't know that it's healthy overall for the game. So, but I like Friesland.
So I guess, do you expect to see a lot of people picking up Friesland, guys? I mean, okay, maybe that's the wrong question. Would you rather have Neustrashimi or Friesland? Because they're kind of in the same spot doing a lot of the same things.
I'd take Friesland over the Neustrashimi. I would take Friesland. But to answer your first question before you took it back, I don't think it's going to be hugely popular. I think it'll find a niche group of players that like the attributes of it, and they're looking for something different in a destroyer. It's probably primarily going to be your destroyer mains that take it, and that are just looking for something to switch things up every now and then, or they get burnt out because carriers are just continuing plopping on them, and they just want to play a revenge round where they just shoot down planes and go after carriers. But I don't think it's going to be massively popular. I think Smolensk is probably going to get a lot more attention, just because, like Arun said, and what we've touched on, the abilities of the Friesland are somewhat limited in what it can do. I mean, it can do what it does very, very good. I mean, it's at the top as far as AA. I mean, it's almost at the top as far as DPM. But again, no heal. It's got great smoke, but its role is very limited.
Yeah, I think it's very much going to be, a great support destroyer, and it's going to be one that you're constantly going to see in divisions. When I test, I try and test these ships solo, so it does kind of skew it a little bit. But almost most of the games that I was in, it's like, wow, if I was in a division, this ship would be even more like stupid good. And you're at the mercy of matchmaking if you go in solo with a ship like Friesland. So yeah, in a div, people are going to look for that. It's going to be one of those ultimate div ships.
I think the ship is going to be rather unpopular as far as reward ships go anyway. I'm sure, unless there's like a big surge in CV play, because, well, the others already said it mostly. It's because it works really well in a division, but how often do people play in divisions? And the other thing is that even though Friesland might be really, really good against CVs, you still can't guarantee that the CV actually, well, if they know roughly where you are, they can just not fly over there and deal with all the other things. And the problem is that even though she's really good against planes, the planes can still kind of ruin your game by just flying on the edge, spotting you for a little bit, then a bunch of ships shoot you, then the planes fly away, the planes come back again, spot you for a little bit, etc. And I noticed that even though I had a really easy time shooting down planes, I'm still afraid of the CV because of that spotting issue. And they'll also give away exactly where I am, so I can't exactly go and surprise anyone in those cases either. And because of that, I think Friesland is probably not going to be that popular.
I don't know. It is Dutch. So there might be a lot of Dutch players that pick up this ship.
Alrighty. Well, a ship I've been looking forward to for quite some time. Siegfried is the O-class battlecruiser concept from the Plan Z of the German Kriegsmarine. Intended to support the Bismarck and H-class battleships, she has high speed, relatively light armor, and the same guns found on Gneisenau, Bismarck, and Tirpitz, albeit with better gun dispersion. Her 6 guns are accurate, but deal some inconsistent damage. Her torpedoes are handy, but the ship struggles at brawling ranges in a bad way, making her secondaries and torpedoes of somewhat dubious value. She does have some upcoming changes on the dev blog, namely a reduction in torpedo range from 8 kilometers to 6 kilometers and 1 less base heal. I enjoy playing Siegfried. I enjoy the gameplay style of the ship, but there are some serious issues with this ship, and I'm curious to see if you guys have the same experience I did.
It hits like a wet noodle. It just doesn't deal damage, in my opinion.
I'm not a fan of it. I'm really not. It took me 5 rounds to break 100,000 damage. And when I finally did, I did 170k. but it's only because the enemy team decided to just stay broadside to me. You're very dependent on, getting good angles with this ship, because if you don't get that broadside, you're really not going to do much. The HE's miserable. The HE's horrible. You take damage left, right, center, straight, above, below, wherever you get hit. And again, those torpedoes that are getting nerfed, I mean, they're just there for looks. I don't want to be close enough to any ship to use 8-kilometer torpedoes in this thing. I just don't. I wouldn't say that the shells completely hit like wet noodles. I mean, if you're top tier, sure, they're great. But yeah, if you're up against tier 10 ships, I found that this ship just cannot compete against tier 10 ships. It's fast. It's got that going for it. It's nimble. It can turn pretty quickly. I mean, its handling is very good for the size of the ship and what it is, which I think will make it a good flanking ship. If you pair it up with some Alsasses or some other of the faster, bigger ships, but again, you're contingent on getting broadsides from ships, and that doesn't always happen. And outside of that, you're just going to get, the ship is fragile. And also one of the the nerfs that we didn't mention yet is they took away a heel from it, and that's going to hurt it even more. It's going to hurt it more. So I thought before this devlog came out that the ship would get some buffs. And I think everything we've been saying is that it needs buffs. But seeing that it got nerfs, I'm just kind of scratching my head right now, because I don't think anyone I've talked to has enjoyed this ship in testing.
Yeah, I've tried to enjoy this ship, and as you say, you hit the nail right on the head. Really, they're dropping the torpedo. God, one round, that was like how I got most of my damage, was I surprised a couple of ships by accidentally torpedoing them. The guns, yeah, if you can get a good broadside, you'd be surprised at the damage and the citadels that you can get with it. But it's still the same 15-inch German guns that now, even with, on Bismarck and Tirpitz, it feels like, kind of inadequate. It feels like, the game has left them behind. Thankfully for those ships, they've got the secondaries and they've got the armor to kind of get in and brawl and augment that damage. But for a ship that is really dependent upon its 6 guns and maybe the lucky torpedo hit or two if you happen to be close enough, there's been times where I've tried to sneak in, and I'm actually surprised at how nimble the ship is, given its size. But even with all the rudder mods, even at range, people are going to hit you and you're going to take damage. And the fact that they're taking away a heal charge, I don't know. I think they're, and what's funny is you can't even take, if you wanted to buff the secondaries, not that it has good secondary range, even if you tried to max buff it, but you can't even take manual fire secondaries on it. So I thought that was kind of amusing. It's no, you cannot do that on this ship. Focus on your main guns.
So you mentioned what the Tirpitz and the Bismarck still have going for it. They've got those secondaries, and I agree that their guns have largely been power creeped and left behind. I wouldn't even want 11.5 kilometer secondaries on this ship. I just do not want to get close to any ships in this thing, and especially if you're in a tier 10 battle. And we know how rough it is if you're a Tirpitz or a Bismarck going up against tier 10 battleships. Even if they're broadside, it's hard to do significant damage against them. And you only have 6 shells, and though accurate they are at times, it suffers the same way that the Georgia suffers. And, despite having the most accurate guns in the game for battleships, Georgia still suffers because your misses just hurt so much more because you only have 6 shells. So I personally think that this ship needs a lot of work right now, and they need to decide what role they want this ship to be in, because I don't know if you can't really kite in it, because the further you get away, the wider your dispersion is going to get, the harder it is going to be to hit enemies. So the wheelhouse for these guns is right between, 12 and 15 kilometers. Any closer than that, and you just overpin cruisers, which is very, very annoying as well. But you don't want to get close to ships either. So you're kind of stuck wondering what is the role of this ship. And that's why the only thing I can think of is just a flanking ship where, you just rush out with a Georgia and an Alsace and other fast ships and, just take the extreme side of the map and try and get a surprise flank on the enemy before they realize you're there and start focusing you. Outside of that, I just don't know the purpose of this ship or what they want it to be.
It's okay. If you're having trouble dealing damage to tier 10 ships with AP, just switch to HE. So you can hit half of your shells on the target and you don't even deal 3,000 damage per salvo. That's kind of why I feel that she hits like a wet noodle, because if you don't get the broadsides, and because you have German AP, you're not like US AP with the good angles, the cruiser ones, well, you end up in a situation where you have to fire HE at times, and the HE just does absolutely no damage. And I don't know. I would say that the survivability isn't even the biggest part. Losing a heal is actually really bad, but I think it's not the end of the world. I actually expected the nerf, so to say, to be the other way around, that her torpedo range would actually be increased, and maybe she would actually get an extra heal on top of that, because she just doesn't feel like a ship. If you go close and the enemy just doesn't give you a broadside, what do? You can't do anything. Your HE doesn't do any damage. Your AP will bounce because you have 380 guns, meaning that if you're against a Baltimore, for example, that's a tier 8 cruiser, you can't overmatch the bow of that ship with AP. So, yeah, I don't know. The ship just feels... Okay, she's definitely going to be slaying many dragons, in my opinion. Other than the eastern and southern ones. But they're so rare, it's not going to happen.
So one of the things that I kind of noticed is that most of the tier 9 supercruisers feel poor to play, but the tier 10 ones don't. And I kind of feel like Siegfried is in the same boat.
Yeah, I can kind of agree with that assessment.
Go
ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I'd rather be in any other tier 9 cruiser than Siegfried. Anyone, doesn't matter. I'd rather be in a Zuma,
Alaska.
Alaska's a decent ship, though. I think Alaska kind of breaks the mold.
See, I find...
I squared off against quite a few Alaskas, and there were so many times like I'd rather be in that ship than this ship. And did you take full rudder mods, or did you go concealment with this? Because I ended up just dumping the concealment, because I was like, I have got to move and scoot with this ship. But it didn't feel like it really mattered, because you were still taking massive hits. And, even if you put distance, then you're taking the plunging fire.
See, I took the opposite approach. I started with concealment, then slapped on the double rudder just to see how it handled. Thought it handled great, but I just decided it was more important to be able to stay hidden when I needed to, just because the ship just takes so much damage.
I think I would rather play Ibuki than her most of the time.
See, I actually enjoyed Siegfried for the most part. I played her with concealment, not the double rudder mods, and I enjoyed the concept of it. She really felt very nimble. Now, she struggles to do damage. There's no question of that. But she plays very battleship-like, and that's always a way that I like to play the game. My problem is that her bow is just awful. You get penetrated through the bow by everything.
Well, maybe we just need to start testing her rear and see how her rear get. I almost said something that didn't sound right, but yeah, maybe that's where all the armor is, and she's meant to kite and just run away. But I don't know. I really have no desire to test her much anymore after the testing.
I will say that she is very effective at dealing with cruisers, particularly the heavy cruisers. If in a world where you've got Siegfried versus the heavy cruisers, I did just fine. It's that too many times you're forced to fight a battleship, and that's just a bad position to be in.
I wouldn't mind testing it more, but it needs buffs, not nerfs. I mean, I've seen a few other testers have really, really good games in it, but I mean, that's kind of really, I don't know. I think I felt like those games, like people were just sitting there giving broadsides away and just really just asking for it.
Well, we do have another ship to talk about, and that is Ark Royal, which is something of a meh boat to use for me, to use Little White Mouse terms. The carrier gameplay at Tier 6 is pretty rough, but even so, her historical deeds make me love looking at her in my port. I'm super glad to see the fairy swordfish on her deck, but not so much when they're in the air. That said, they're buffing her torpedo bomber squadron from 6 to 9 and giving you a third potential attack. Now, Zoup, I know you did put out a video on Ark Royal. You were talking about that Ark Royal needs something. Are these changes that they're making to Ark Royal what you think that needs to be happen?
So I suggested in the Discord channel that that's what they needed to do with the torpedo bombers. I actually suggested that they needed to bump the torpedo bombers up to 9, decrease the regular bombers to 6, just to help things out, because those torpedo bombers, and I highlighted in my video, you're almost guaranteed as it stands to only get one full drop off, because you drop with 3 planes. One of those planes is going to get shot down, at least one of them, which just leaves you with 2 or 1 for your second turn on a ship. The problem is, and I love they went the historical route, but I mean, you've got cloth planes that fly at 100 knots. That's an issue right there when you're thrown into a tier 8 battle, which is going to happen a lot. I mean, I found that, the Ark Royal is perfectly up to par with the other tier 6 aircraft carriers. I mean, it does fine. Damage output, it feels low, only doing 60,000 damage until you realize, well, yeah, it is a tier 6 aircraft carrier with so slow planes. I mean, that's what tier 6 carriers do. They don't influence the game quite the way the tier 10 carriers do, and even tier 8s to a lesser extent, but they're kind of hurting right now from the anti-aircraft changes. So it's a meh boat. I get the historical value. I think it needs to be in the game for that purpose. It's a beautiful ship. I love the camouflage they have on it. I love that they made it historical. But you've got the Blackburn skuas that their rockets are just weak. Those need a buff. And you've got planes that are historically slow, and it's like, what can you do for them? I mean, if you make them any faster, it's just going to look, unrealistically fake. But I mean, that goes along with, well, where do you draw the line from realism? So overall, I think Ark Royal is going to sell well. I think it's got a lot of people that are interested because of its history. Its bombers are great planes. You could use those and only those and do pretty good in a round. But again, your damage is hurt just because your planes are so slow. By the time you get anywhere, you're basically waiting a minute or two between a drop and a reload and everything else. So it's just, I don't think it's meh. It's just boring. It's like watching paint dry.
I looked at the so when we got Ark Royal, I looked at the speed of the torpedo bombers, and then I was like, "Yep, not gonna bother with the ship unless I'm really bored."
And in that, you'll become even more bored, because it is just you could literally run up, make tea in the time it takes for your planes to get where they need to go. I mean,
yeah. What I meant by that is that I haven't actually played her because it just seems so uninteresting. I've played the tier 4 CVs and I know how that feels, but now we're even at an even higher tier. It's not gonna be fun. I don't see how they could possibly make it fun.
I do. Change the planes on it. Leave the option to use the fairy swordfish for the history aficionados out there, just so they're on there, just so people can't be like, well, how can you leave the planes that, attack the Bismarck? How could you leave those off? And put some planes that can actually do something on there. And, if you've got those players out there that just want to fly historic planes that actually flew on it and, contributed, against the Bismarck, fine, let them do their thing. But for the other players that actually want to use a ship that has a chance of doing something in a battle, give them planes that actually work. That's the only way I can see that will fix this ship, or make it exciting at least.
No, it won't. I mean, have you played the other Royal Navy carriers?
Yeah, Audacious is great. I think it's probably the best tier 10 right now, post AA changes.
Yeah,
Again,
and the
it's
tier 6 one.
10. There's a reason I didn't mention that one. And that brings up a bigger problem. That brings up a huge problem right now. Tier 6 carriers are not in a good place. Tier 8 carriers really aren't in a good place. Tier 10 carriers are still overperforming, or at least able to shape the battle in a way that their counterparts down below can't. So there's still an imbalance between the tiers with aircraft carriers, and you feel it the hardest at 6 and at 8, just because if you're low tier, your life is miserable in those aircraft carriers. So I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that Ark Royal is bad. I think it's just that tier 6 carriers in general are bad, and not necessarily bad. They're just not in a good place right now.
Alrighty. Well, we have a single question of the week this week. As forum user Ariok wants us to talk about mid-tier gameplay, and we've talked about this a little bit, especially with the NTC and things like that. But he has several suggestions on how to improve mid-tier gameplay, and like our opinions on whether or not we think that any of these would work. So he has 5 of them here, and I'll just read through them, and then I'd like to get you guys' opinion on whether or not you think these ideas would work, and if not, then maybe suggest some ideas of your own. So the first one is have events that require tier 5 to 7 ships, stop offering shortcuts for new lines to skip ships, rework matchmaker to group it into tier 3 to 4, 5 to 7, 8 to 9, and 10 alone, stop charging for port slots, and reduce free XP gain on the whole.
So it seems like this has been a hot topic lately. I'm a proponent of 1 and 2, and Rank Sprint has kind of helped with that. You know, you've got tier 7 and back-to-back rank sprints. And while I know tier 8 really isn't mid-tier, it's still not tier 9 and 10, and we're going to have clan battles at that. So I think that's definitely a step in the right direction. I also agree that the shortcuts aren't helping, and I mentioned that in the past also. So I'm in agreement with that as well. The third point's not going to happen. Wargaming has said over and over that they're not going to tinker with matchmaking too much, or do +1 matchmaking only. So you're not going to see tier 8s only going up against 9s or 7s. That's just not on their docket. They don't want to tackle that. They've got their reasons, and no matter what we think or say, they're not budging on this issue. So it's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. And I can see where they're coming from. You do have rounds where you're the only tier 5 or tier 6 in a battle with tier 6s and 7s. Can you imagine if you were the only tier 5 in an enhanced matchmaking, trying to get that +1, waiting for enough ships? It would really just kind of slow down the queue time a little bit. So I think that's the major reason why they don't want to touch it. But I think lately, in the past month, Wargaming has done some nice things to kind of highlight the lower tiers, or at least the mid tiers. And really, I think it's up to us as well. I mean, we're waiting for Wargaming to do things, but nothing's stopping us from playing these mid-tier ships. And, last night, streaming with Sea Raptor and Vulgar, we decided to take out some lower tier ships. We did a triple Leon division, and then we took out some Nikolais just do the old seal clubbing that we used to do. But playing those ships and getting down in the lower tiers, it's just like, wow, I forgot how fun this actually is. Obviously not beating up on poor defenseless seals, but the game is what you make of it, and nothing's stopping anyone from playing mid tiers. But I also agree, and I've said over and over, Wargaming should be incentivizing the mid tiers as well. They've paid too much focus on tier 9 and tier 10 right now, to the point that mostly all of their ships coming out are stuck up there. So it's nice to see Sprint down at 7. I'd love to see it back at 6 and maybe even 5 at some point, though I think if you do that, you're just going to see a bunch of kamikazes running around. But I agree with them. Some of those issues totally agree with, and they need to change it. Unfortunately, some of them Wargaming's not.
Yeah, I don't think they'll ever touch the matchmaking, but there could be, maybe definitely more incentives. I think some greater incentives to work around there, and maybe also, maybe kind of curtailing not the free XP, but kind of the skipping part would definitely address. But like you said, the game has really become about tier 10, and I think they kind of want to remove the barrier for people that are just playing the game and they want to play with their friends and they want to get to tier 10. But then you run into the aspect of, well, you're losing a lot of the knowledge that you need to gain, the experience that you need to gain working with those ships, so that when you arrive at tier 10, you understand the game, you understand mechanics, and you have experience and knowledge to back up so that you understand how to play effectively at tier 10. So I don't know, Wargaming's put themselves in a position where, they want to expand the player base, keep interest, keep people playing in the game, and the game has become about the top tier. There's a lot of analogs to the World of Warcraft here, where you kind of saw them change the game to where it's all about rating and get to the very end, and you almost see very similar things with World of Warships, where get to tier 10, and a lot of the stuff that you're going to do is at tier 10. So I would love to see, maybe some more stuff like rank sprint, maybe some more interesting scenarios, maybe, really get some decent scenarios out there where maybe you require a varying range of ships. I don't know, but it'd be interesting to see.
So I had the suggestion a while ago that maybe Wargaming could do something like they designate a day in a week, or maybe 2 days in a week, where you'll kind of have like a ranked sprint option, except it'll be random battles and for a specific tier, or maybe matchmaking will be much more strict in that sense. Maybe you just have to queue up for random battles on that specific day, but make it so that it's really, really advertised that, hey, this is the special day for tier 7s, where when you queue up as a tier 7, you're mostly in a tier 7 game. Now, obviously, I understand the negative consequences of this, that if that happens, then tier 8s aren't going to meet tier 7s quite often, so they'll have a worse time at tier 10s. But at least in those cases, I would see people being more willing to play the lower tiers, because I think the biggest issue is that if I queue up in a tier 8, when I get into a tier 10 battle, I'm already disappointed just from the matchmaking. It doesn't really matter what the rest of the match entails. I'm almost guaranteed to be disappointed by it, because I'm very likely not to be nearly as effective as I am. And on top of that, I'm also likely to actually just be frustrated by it. For example, if I queue up in the Baltimore, if I am tier 8 and I am top tier, so tier 6 to 8, then I'm in a really good position, because Baltimore has 27mm bow plating and stern, meaning that any kind of AP shells that aren't like specific tier 7 and higher battleships, I will be able to bounce just by angling towards them, just like battleships do. Or actually even better than battleships do, the tier 7 ones and lower anyway, because the bow armor is better. For example, I run into a Bismarck and I don't have to fear the AP. But if I'm in a tier 8 battle, I'm still in a relatively decent position, because that's kind of what I'm going to run into. But if I'm in a tier 10 battle, I can't have the safety. I can't play in the same way that I do in the Baltimore if I'm in my own tier or top tier, because in those cases I'm going to be up against much higher caliber battleship shells, and those will just go through my bow very easily. And if I run into a cruiser, I'm going to get eaten alive, because chances are pretty good that the cruiser just has more HE DPM than I do, and I don't even have a heal. So it changes the way I play the game, and on top of that, it also makes it frustrating, because even if I change the way I play the game, I'm usually less effective, because my ship just isn't quite as good as the other ships. And so I'd like to see some kind of a way that matchmaking helps there a little bit. Ranked sprint is a great way. to do it. Because, well, obviously a ranked sprint means that you can only meet ships that are your tier, meaning that you're not going to be frustrated because suddenly a tier 9 ship isn't going to appear in your game when it's a tier 7 one. So more events like ranked sprint could definitely work, but also maybe some kind of thing that's more regular, that's available, for example, when clan battles are going, because clan battles take a while, and during that, I don't have any of that. Also, if you're playing like the low tiers, like the tier 4s and 5s, I would say, especially tier 4s, I don't mind that at all. I just feel kind of dirty playing it because it feels so easy almost all the time, especially because the ships at that tier, some of them are just insanely strong, whereas others are just really mediocre.
I'm on board with you guys for the most part. I do think that some emphasis on the mid-tier gameplay is a good idea. I think that messing with Matchmaker in general is a bad idea. So the idea of making 10s only play against 10s, I think that's horrifically bad, because it is not. I've been in a few of those games. I've played in Clan Wars. I've played in random battles where every single ship was a tier 10 ship, and the balance is good enough at tier 10 that that's a really difficult. Those are difficult games to play, and yeah, you feel rewarded when you win when that happens, but it's not always fun. So I think they have mentioned in the past that they're looking at giving up the cost for port slots. I think we are going to see that going down the line. The idea here that really kind of was interesting to me was reducing free XP gain. And the reason for that is that there's been a real surfeit of free XP that's entered the game from ranked battles and clan battles. And I'm kind of curious to hear what you guys' thoughts are on how that free XP bonus that we're seeing, that is very rich in free XP, has affected the game at multiple tiers.
Oh, the economy's out of whack. It's been out of whack for a while. The ability to gain XP as fast as people can. I know people are like, one of the things brought up was removing the ability to skip through the classes, and that'll only help so much. But as it stands right now, with the amount of flags and signals and hydras and everything else that we're handed, I mean, you can breeze through a high tier class and about a dozen rounds. I mean, you can knock out. It was a grind back in the day. It was an extreme grind back in the day to get to tier 10. Even with premium, it took a long time. It was an accomplishment. It was something you were proud of when you got there. I mean, I still remember getting my first tier 10 ship. It was a Montana. It took ages to get there. And over the years, while it took me several hundred games to get there back then, now you can do it in maybe 100 or 150 if you're just starting out and you've got plenty of flags and everything else. The only difference there is, where the economy is not quite out of whack, is it still hurts for the free-to-play players out there. The ones that don't have premium, the ones that can't accrue the flags and aren't putting money into the game, they're the ones that are still taking a long time to get to tier 10. And I think at this point, it's almost unfair to them right now that it's so easy for one set of players to get there. I mean, there's always been the difference between, the beginning of the game, but now it's just even so much easier for someone paying to get to tier 10. So I don't know that there's a way to come back from this right now. The economy's just so out of whack that I don't think there is a going back right now. I think the way it is now is just the way it's going to be, for better or for worse.
And remember, back then, the actual money-making potential was really hard. Even at tier 10, with a premium account, and before we had a lot of signals and flag boosting, you pretty much lost money every round, even if you had a really, really insanely good round. And, it's completely night and day different economy-wise, what it used to be, just with credits. And yeah.
Missouri jumped the shark. Missouri was the beginning.
Tier Pits was the first one to print money.
I mean, well, the players asked for the economy to be changed so that people wouldn't lose money at tier 10, and eventually Wargaming relented. Well, maybe there was a good reason why Wargaming had it balanced the way it was before. But I'd like to address the... Oh, also, on that note, it was possible back in the day to not have premium accounts and still break even in terms of tier 10 gameplay. I remember I did exactly that for a long time. But I wanted to address the skipping tiers part. I don't think we're ever getting to skip I don't think we're getting rid of the skipping tiers part. In fact, I think it'll just make things slightly worse because, as I understand it, the point of that system is so that it doesn't clog up matchmaking quite the same way as on launch day. Because remember, when certain ships were released, you would have like 600 of a battleship in queue, and then you just sit there and sit there and sit there for a really long time. I think the point of skipping tiers is to lessen the impact of a situation like that. So I don't see them getting rid of that. And I don't really think it's going to be that effective anyway because of the free XP thing. We just have so much of it if you have the flags and whatnot. I would say a dozen games is... That's, that means you're not going all out because it's entirely possible to do it in like 7 if you have good games, or even less. On the other hand, though, I don't see the free XP gain really changing. It might be that Wargaming might make it more difficult, or like you need more of the free XP or something like that to get there, but I don't see free XP gain itself becoming lower, because usually you can't nerf the economy in a game because the players will just complain. It's just going up, 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 and it'll just keep going up.
Alrighty, well, we'll see how the mid-tier gameplay and what the economy changes happen in the next little bit. But I think you're right, Aaron. I don't think they're at a point where they can go back. And even if they did, I don't think it would make a difference. Well, that's it for this. Go ahead, Mitch.
Arun brought up a really great point in that, back under the old economy, you almost never made money at tier 9 and tier 10, even with premium accounts. So when you use those ships, it was kind of a guilty pleasure, or hey, I've got money to burn, so I'm going to enjoy these ships. And the bulk of playing was at tier 8. And that's kind of where people stopped, because you could still make money and still have decent games and still kind of experience that high level of gameplay. And then you had, these remarkably good premiums at the time. You had Atago, which, was kind of the go-to for a lot of people, and especially to grind up money. And then Tirpitz came out and, it just printed Deutschmarks. It was literally a mobile print. And then Missouri and so on and so on. And then they changed the economy to where, and now we have what we have today. But that was a really good point, because I didn't think about that. And then it was like, that actually... We used to really sit at tier 8 because that's where the money was made. And with that gone, all those tier 8s shrunk. And now we have more tier 9s, more tier 10s. And now tier 8 always feels like it's the bottom tier because not enough people are playing them to make money like they used to.
Alrighty, well, that's it for this week, folks. Do remember that we have a new spot on the NA forums just for the Warships Podcast. Be sure to check that out for news and where to ask questions of the week. And we are always looking for questions of the week, so be sure to post on there and we'll get your questions answered. Check for that link in the description. As always, follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Warship Podcast and Twitter at Warships Podcast for updates between episodes. Don't forget to check out Arun on YouTube and Twitch as well. And I wanted to thank you again, Zoup, for coming on the show today. We always enjoy having you and discussing your kind of views on the game.
Well, I appreciate you all having me, and I'm glad you haven't got tired of me yet. It's always a blast coming on here with you guys, so thank you.
Absolutely. I'm sure we'll have you on again quite soon. We, of course, want to thank our amazing Patreon backers. If you're interested in supporting us, please consider becoming a Patreon backer yourself. Backers are what make the podcast possible, and we could not make this podcast without you guys, so thank you guys very much. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week.